Hello, hello. I think it's live. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good middle of the night, wherever you may be. Yeah, thank you all for joining. Actually got a good chunk of people here. It's kind of exciting. Yeah, so the structure of today will be very simple. Just gonna, I got a lot of questions from all of you. Thank you for those great questions in response to that last email I sent out. And I'm just going to kind of go through some of these questions that you all sent in. And if you have others, just put them in the comments. I can see the comments here. I just built this super janky local web auto refresh question display system, so we'll see how that works. I'm going to try to have questions appear here while I answer them, because I think that just makes it simpler to think about, and for people watching this later, they don't have to listen to me just recite the question. So it is 11:03 a.m. here now, so I'm in the spirit of getting started on time. Let's get going. So first of all, I guess I should just recap what it is I did, what it is we did. So this was a 31-day, it ended up being 31 days, 31-day walk that my goal was to go to 10 cities in Japan that were like fairly mid-sized cities. So, I mean, you could kind of think of them almost as like flyover cities. This is kind of like, it'd be like going to small mid-sized cities in like Kansas or maybe Missouri or something like that. Places that you might transit through, but not necessarily get off the train at. In Japan, get off the train at, get off the plane at in America or whatever. And so the goal was kind of like, I'd been to a few of these cities and I was kind of captivated by the potential. And I always thought, oh, it's such a shame that I don't get to spend any time here. It's like, even on the last big walk I did in May, June, where I was in the Kii Peninsula, I finished in Tanabe City, and I think I did 2 nights there, and I was just sort of like, and I was doing big walks during the day. I didn't really have time to focus on that city, but I was kind of surprised by how much, like I said, potential I felt. So that got me thinking about, oh, well, there are all these other cities that have kind of touched through the process of other big walks. So cities like Yamaguchi that, I'd been to 2 years ago, just as COVID was like coming up on the radar here. Going to Yamaguchi, but not spending time in Yamaguchi. I spent a few hours walking around, but that was it. So the goal with this walk was to really go to these places that, you would almost categorically not visit if you were a tourist coming to the country and you had a week. These would not be on your list of places to go to for most itineraries. And then even for people who live here, even for Japanese folks, the idea of going to some of these cities is not something that people would think about. Some of these, yes. Some of the cities, yes, but not all of them. So the theory was, if you spend 3 nights in each of these cities, which gives you 2 full days and kind of maybe a evening or a morning on the either end. If you spend three nights in each of these cities, you'll find interesting, fun, curious, delicious things. And each of these cities should have a character that warrants spending time with them. And that was the theory. And I'm happy to report that it played out really well. That was I found that this trip was incredibly compelling. And I have a much better understanding of Japan now. It sounds weird to say that, but I feel like I've seen and I've engaged with bits of the country that I hadn't before. And it's a very different tenor than the big walks I was doing earlier this year or last year or the year before. The big continuous walks like the Nakasendo or the Tokaido walks or the Kii Peninsula walks. This was interesting because I was in places, right? So it worked out well. So where did we go? The whole sort of flow of it, and maybe a map is helpful for illustrating this. Let me see. Stick my head in the corner. There we go. So the walk began in Hakodate, so up in Hokkaido, and then it went down to Morioka, which is in Iwate. And actually, Paper Sky just put out a great new issue all about Iwate. It's only in Japanese, but if you speak Japanese and read Japanese, or if you like nice pictures, pick up that Paper Sky. Then we took the train over to Sakata, which is over here in Yamaguchi. And then Yamagata. We'll get to Yamaguchi later. And then the train down from Sakata to, this was quite a long day. This is probably the longest day, to Matsumoto, which is in Nagano. That was down there. And then the train to Tsuruga, over here in Fukui Prefecture. A couple years ago, I was in Obama on a little research project with the tourism board over there. That was interesting. So that's kind of how Tsuruga got on my radar, is that Fukui was kind of a curious place. And then we came all the way down to Onomichi, which is in Hiroshima Prefecture. And then I biked across the inland sea on a bunch of bridges to Imabari, took the train to Matsuyama, which is in Ehime. Then I took a jet boat over here, stopped in Kure for a second. I got off in Hiroshima, got on the wrong streetcar, took a really long time to get to the station, got to the station, and then took the Shinkansen to Shin Yamaguchi over here. And then the local train up to Yamaguchi, hung out in Yamaguchi for a few days. And then we took the trains down to Karatsu, which is in Saga-ken, so down here on the coast, and then finished up by going down to Kagoshima, which is all the way at the bottom of Kyushu. And you can kind of see, I was trying to, I had a couple of sort of theories or things I was trying to work with when I was designing this. So the first question, let me put this up in our makeshift question thing. Oh, it doesn't appear here. Hold on a second. Well, I'll explain this first. You can see on this map, I tried to keep it as linear as possible. So I was trying to avoid backtracking. I was trying to avoid going over to sort of out of the way places and then having to come back to it. I had this kind of sort of light guide of, I want all the trips to be less than 3 hours. 3 hours or so was kind of what I was aiming for between cities. Didn't always work out that way, but for the most part, that's about the distance between each of these places. Obviously, Sakata to Matsumoto was about 6 hours. And then actually Saga to the Karatsu to Kagoshima wasn't that long. Fukui, the Tsuruga to Onomichi actually stopped in Kyoto on the way, so that kind of broke it up a bit. But for the most part, it was 4 hours, so it was good distances. And let's see here. Here we go. Now we can see a question. So how did you decide where to visit on this walk? And it must have been difficult choosing where to visit among so many choices. So like I said, I had this organizing principle of small-ish cities, mid-sized cities that kind of felt like they had some life in them, some energy in them that I had either been near or passed through or spent a night at or had heard about, or fit into that rubric of 3 hours and linearly down, basically trying to get from Hokkaido to the bottom of Kyushu. And the reason why I picked some of these was purely logistical. So, for example, Hakodate in Hokkaido was simply because to go further into Hokkaido was just too onerous, and I wanted to avoid planes. One of my goals was to not take any planes. So I wanted just trains, and I wanted to go to Hokkaido, and Hakodate was like, that's pretty much the easiest place to do if you're going to go to Hokkaido. So that worked out well. Hakodate ended up being really interesting. It kind of set the tone for kissas and jazz kissas for sure, and kind of kicked off a big kind of push in terms of just following my nose, right? So we can talk about the rules I had and which I followed and which I didn't follow later. But so that was in terms of picking the places. Yeah, there are just so many cities that you could choose. And I just remember we had these spreadsheets I was making in prep for this, and working with some friends and my assistant, and we were just trying to figure out where should we go. And you just gets to a point where you just go, actually, it kind of doesn't matter where we pick it. They've all just got to be in this general size. And then what we'll do is this trip, I will learn so much on this trip that going back and doing a similar trip in a year or two, I think I have a good sense of other places that I'd want to see along the way. So for example, like Hagi popped up a bunch on this trip, and I definitely want to go spend some time in Hagi at some point. That's near Yamaguchi. So that was kind of how that worked out. That worked out pretty well. But yeah, it is overwhelming, but there's just a point where you just go, all right, I've just got to pick these places. And then what I like to do on these trips is I book everything in advance. So that forces me to, it removes a bunch of cognitive load of choosing where to stay, where to go next. That actually takes up a ton of energy. When I'm in these walks, when I'm doing these trips, I don't want to be thinking about logistics. I want to be focused purely on connecting with interesting people, walking around, experiencing the place, feeling the energy of the place. And then anytime at night that I have, I want to be writing. I want to be synthesizing. I want to be editing photos. I want to be editing, video and stuff like that. So that's basically, sorry, I'm just looking at the refresh rate on this web page. I realize the text is blinking there. It's kind of maybe a little bit distracting. So anyway, that was how it was sort of all organized. Next question. If you had to move to one of the cities, which one would you move to and why? So there's a few, I think, that were amazing, that were really, really kind of surprising, compelling, really cute, had a lot of good energy. I don't know if I would want to move to any of them full time. I just want to put that caveat out there. But in terms of places I could definitely move to for, say, a year, which I think is kind of an interesting amount of time. For a year, I could go to Matsumoto easily. Matsumoto just had this vibrancy, and it's kind of in this cradle. There's certain cities that are like kind of cradled by mountains. They're in these plains. Nara kind of fits into this category as well. And I just find there's a really interesting energy at those places, and I think you can kind of understand why they were chosen for settlements a long time ago. And Asuka down south of Nara, again in this like super fertile cradle, just feels like you're really protected, and the energy, to get woo-wooey, which I think is just a way of saying the air feels good, the soil feels good, so that you're intuiting that through quote unquote the energy of the place. Matsumoto to me really had that vibe. I really liked it. And it's also right at the mouth of one of my favorite walking routes in Japan, which is the Kisoji. So starting at Shiojiri and going through that Kiso Valley. So living there, could do a lot of fun Kisoji little, daily expeditions or whatever. So Matsumoto, totally amazing. Yamaguchi was also pretty amazing. It's very, very small. I would say in terms of psychic size, Yamaguchi felt about maybe a third or a quarter the size of Yamaguchi. But Yamaguchi, I made friends the most quickly of any place. I feel like I actually made friends. I connected with people that I was brought into a community there really fast. That was surprising. That was really delightful. So that's a positive if you're gonna live somewhere. Karatsu is also really amazing, although very, very small. I think I could probably do a year there, but I'd probably also want to be like apprenticing with some potter. I feel like that would be the thing to do if you're going to move to Karatsu. Really kind of lean into that local culture of pottery, which is what what the area is known for. In terms of like, okay, you put a gun to my head and you're like, you have to move to a city and stay there. Kagoshima, I guess, is probably the best approximation of big city. It was surprisingly big and vibrant. And the one actually really exciting thing about Kagoshima was that anytime I said to anyone in Kagoshima, and I said this to a lot of people, I said, hey man, this place feels like it's got a lot of energy, and like feels like things are good here. And they're like, it is good here. We love it. This is amazing. We love Kagoshima. Everyone. It was like, I said that to like 88-year-old people, and they were like, Kagoshima is amazing. I said to that 24-year-old barber who shaved my head last week, he was like, Kagoshima is the best. We love it. So that's really interesting, because you don't get that in all places. Like, so for example, you talk to older folks in Onomichi. Onomichi, which I also found to be amazing, and has this kind of interesting, hippie, vibrant, young community kind of growing there. Also, strangely, it was the only anti-vax place I found. People were very much did not believe in COVID in Onomichi for some reason. But aside from that, in Japan, whatever, a month ago it didn't matter. Now it's probably going to matter a little more if you believe in it or not. But Onomichi, the older folks were all like, our town's dead, this place sucks. And the young people were like, it's kind of cool. You know, I'm paying $50 rent for this place to run a shop out of. So in the Kagoshima element of everyone being so excited about it, feeling like it has a positive energy, I think is great. And I don't know if having a smoking volcano right next to your city engenders that energy or not, but it could be part of it. And then Morioka as well was an amazing city. Morioka, again, super good energy, vibrant sort of sense of future there. You know, just through, again, a lot of that sense of future is just younger people running things and believing in it. So that was really exciting as well. So it doesn't really answer the question, but those were some of my favorite places that I ended up in. Next question we've got here. There have been so many interesting subplots, like Gakuji's kiln or the jazz kisses. Were there others that didn't make it into the newsletter in as much detail as you'll share later? Sort of. I mean, so this is maybe a good moment to talk about rules, right? So if we go back to my initial post about this walk, which is all conjecture, right? So it's like, obviously I hadn't done the walk. I'm just kind of coming up with these random rules. And, you know, my rules were like, walk 50 kilometers in each city, and you have to visit the barber and a post office and a greengrocer, and like I had this like list of stuff. And so, what I realized quickly in Hakodate is that the universe was going to connect me with people and push me in certain directions that I started following my nose using really quickly. And to me, that seemed like the way to do this kind of walk. So, you know, for example, in Hakodate, I ended up, just like early in the morning, going to that fish market, meeting the drunk fisherman, getting his squid, you know, asking, which was delicious. That was kind of like the surprise food of the trip. But, you know, asking for recommendations and then getting some recommendations from them, following those leads, ending up at, you know, the Jazz Kissa Leaf in Hakodate. The owners were really wonderful. They, you know, said you should check out this Jazz Kissa in this place. I went to those places. Ended up staying at those places for hours. You know, I was at one of the kissas for like 4 or 5 hours. They gave me recommendations. I'd say, hey, I'm going to Morioka, I'm going to Sakata, and they would say, you got to go to this place, you got to go to this cafe, you got to go to this museum, this folk art museum. And so I started kind of really shedding the strictness of those rules. You got to visit this, this, and this. I said, okay, well, I'm going to visit where the kind of natural flow of the walk takes me. I also realized really quickly that 50 kilometers per city is an insane distance for a lot of these places. And so we ended up averaging about 35 kilometers per city, which felt much saner. Also, I just realized the point of this walk was to focus on the people, really, in the end, and not necessarily the distances. And the distance, that 50-kilometer marker or goal post that I set, was really just about a forcing function. So setting up a system in advance, I find this is really important for creative work, is that you want to have in advance systems that enable you to succeed, pre-established, right? Established before you set off on these things. Because in the moment, you're going to get lazy, you're going to get tired, you're not going to want to do the work. And so the more you can set up beforehand, and the more you can kind of have embedded in the experience itself, the better. And so by setting this like post of 50 kilometers per city, basically what I was saying to myself was that you just can't sit at a cafe or sit in your hotel room and twiddle your thumbs. If you don't have something to do, get walking, get those 50 kilometers in. And it just turned out that I was so overwhelmed with meeting people and sort of connecting and writing and being productive and just feeling like I was getting a good sense of where I was, that hitting 50 kilometers would have reduced the experience. Actually, it would have taken away from it. So that was like one of the rules I very quickly modulated. I was just like, okay, I don't have to be doing 50 kilometers a day. This is like, that's gonna take away from all the other, this goodness that I am experiencing. I want to sit in a cafe with that 88-year-old woman in Karatsu, Fukushima-san, and I just want to stand there for, I want to feel like I can stand there for 5 minutes, in silence with her and just look at the room and have her kind of go back through what she's experienced there. And that to me was worth a lot more than abiding by that rule. And so then the other rules as well, around grocers and, getting haircuts and stuff. I got 2 haircuts. I kind of became a little more relaxed with those. So in terms of other subplots that didn't make it into the newsletters, there aren't many really, just because I wrote, I think it's like something like 70,000 words, which is crazy. That's a lot to write in a month. That was my NaNoWriMo while also doing all this traveling and all this other synthesizing. So most of it I wrote about a lot of what was experienced. In terms of subplots, mainly it was just complainy stuff that I didn't write about, because I find it's lazy to complain. I wrote about that a little bit in one of the newsletters. Complaint while traveling is kind of the easiest thing to do, because there's always going to be something that's kind of frustrating. So I guess one big subplot was like moving hotels. So I moved hotels a few times, just because I'd arrive at a city and then realize, oh, I'm in the wrong place, or I should be over here. Oh, actually, there's this brand new hotel that opened 2 weeks ago that wasn't around when I was booking, and it just seems more comfortable. The thing with trips like this is that the hotel is really important. That's your workspace. You want to have fast internet. You want to have a good desk if possible. You want it to be quiet. You want it to be peaceful. You want to have it feel like as much of a home as possible when you're on the road for this long. And so for example, like in Yamaguchi, the first night I arrived, I checked into the hotel, and along with me, like 200 elementary school kids also checked in, and they were occupying the entire floor above me. And it just sounded like actual war was going on up above me. And so I tried to get them to change my room, move my room around. They wouldn't do it. It was very weird. I think they were also having a breakdown from these 200 elementary school kids. And so I went out, I wrote for the day in Starbucks instead of the cafe or instead of the hotel. And then I decided on the way back, I was like, all right, let me check some of these other hotels out. And one of them had a room that was available that wasn't that expensive on the top floor. And I booked it, and I went back to the original hotel. I was like, I can't stay here. I'm checking out. Whether or not you can refund me, I'm checking out. And they're like, we're so sorry. We understand. Refunded me immediately, even though it was, the day of, and I had already checked in. So there were things like that why write about that? That doesn't it's not fun, whatever. There's so much cool stuff, positive stuff to write about. I'd rather just focus on that. You know what I mean? So next question. When did you start to learn Japanese and how did you do it? I assume you would agree that your trip can't be done or enjoyed in English. So I started learning Japanese when I was, I guess technically when I was like 15 or 16. I went to Hawaii when I was like, I think 14, and Honolulu in the early 90s was effectively just little Tokyo, right? So you go to Waikiki, it was just Tokyo, you know, essentially. It was like 50% Japanese tourists and everyone's speaking Japanese. And so that was my first kind of exposure to, I would say, like, it wasn't just like real Japanese people, but unfiltered, straight off the boat kind of a foreignness that I had not entirely experienced before. My hometown, we actually had a really big immigrant population. So some of my two closest friends were Vietnamese and Indian, and they were both first generation. And I would go to their houses, and it was kind of like walking through a portal into those countries. But to kind of see, it's a different thing. The immigrant experiencing someone's immigrant life versus sort of a massive flood of a foreign body into a place as tourists had a very different impact. I ended up, in America, it's very cheap to golf. You know, I grew up kind of golfing, and I remember golfing with some Japanese people in Hawaii. I was like 14, and you couldn't golf alone. They wouldn't let you go out on the course alone, so you had to be paired with people. And so they paired me with some businessmen, Japanese businessmen. And I just remember being so shocked that who knows how old they were. They could have been in their 20s or 30s, probably 30s, 40s. But when you're like 14, they could have been 80. And they were asking me insane questions like, "Are you married?" I'm like, "I'm 14. Who are you?" And one guy had a hat on. I remember he had this hat that said "hoof" and then "arted," and so it said "who farted," and he had no idea what it said or what it meant. I just remember explaining to this like 40, any man between 30 and 80 years old, what that meant. And I was just like, who are these people? They were so nice to me, and they taught me a little bit of Japanese. They taught me, "Hajimemashite, dozo yoroshiku onegai itashimasu." And I remember writing that down. It was like, oh my God, this is the longest hello in the world. And that just kind of kicked it off. It wasn't really, whatever. I'd watched a little anime or whatever, and that was kind of interesting. But really, it was this Hawaii experience and meeting these people and spending time with some of these tourists who had almost no English capability whatsoever. That really kicked off the interest. When I got home, I remember I ordered some kind of like CD language thing. I learned like 4 words like umbrella. I remember casa. I was like, oh, that's like house in Spanish. But I didn't really do any real studying until college. And I did a year of Japanese, and then I came out to Japan for a study abroad, and that was an intensive language course as well. So that was another year. And then when I graduated university in the States, I came back and did a postgrad sort of intensive language study. Again, this was all at Waseda, and then I did like a year of studying on my own. So I guess there's probably 4-ish years, but not very rigorous. I know friends who went to SOAS. And folks at SOAS, I mean, the school there is so intense and rigorous. This is in London. If you do 2 years at SOAS, like you're basically getting 6 years of sort of undergrad and grad in most other programs. It's really impressive. So the SOAS people were just killing it. But that was my main language acquisition period. And then another big part of it was just playing music in Tokyo. I mean, for a decade, I was playing in clubs and studios, multiple times a week with Japanese musicians. And so, none of these people spoke English. So that was a big element of it. And the other part of this question is I would assume you would agree that a trip can't be done or enjoyed in English. I don't think that's true. I think you can definitely do this trip without Japanese. For sure, you can set it up, you can move through Japan. Japan isn't that complicated in terms of logistics of getting around. These places aren't that remote. You're not going to run into problems. You're not going to get probably not going to get beat up. Like I said, there wasn't a sense of violence anywhere. There aren't opioids at large in Japan. There isn't heroin at large. So you remove from the violent population of a country, if you remove I think opioid-like drugs that effectively zombify people into machines that just will do anything to get more of that drug into their system. If you remove that from society, I think you remove a lot of violent crime. That seems to be the case certainly here. So in terms of safety, I think it's pretty easy, even if you don't speak the language, to stay safe. What you would miss out on, obviously, are some of the depth of connection that I think I was able to find, because a lot of these people can't speak English. But you would definitely connect to people. You could mimic this itinerary. You could mirror it with no Japanese skills at all, and you would definitely meet folks and have fun. And so I would say go for it. If you want to come and do a really strange itinerary in Japan, don't hold back. Don't let fear of language, a lack of language ability, keep you from doing that. Let's see here. Here's another question. So, with blue ticks carrying significant cachet in even the smallest towns, how do you see the world of social media further shaping the growth and development, for good and bad, of many of the up-and-coming towns that you visited during your walk? So, up-and-coming, I think, is not the way to describe these towns. None of these towns are like the future of Japan. Up and coming in Japan is really just Tokyo. It's the biggest growth town, probably. Definitely the biggest growth town in terms of population, year-over-year population growth, in terms of sheer numbers and percentages and stuff like that. All the towns I visited are essentially, if they're growing because people are opting out of living in cities and they're a little bit more curious about rural life, but they don't want to be living, say, on a mountain as a hermit. They want to be part of some kind of community. And so cities, towns like Onomichi, Matsumoto, Morioka, Yamaguchi, they serve that purpose really well. Actually, they're extremely livable. There's a community element to them, and extremely livable in the sense cost of living is very cheap. You could if one of the great hacks, if you are able to do remote work and get employed by a foreign entity and live in a town like Matsumoto, you can be living, I would say, a similar lifestyle to if you had $100 million in New York City. That's really money doesn't exist anymore. Your rent is $600 for a beautiful place. People are giving away homes in a lot of these, towns, and then just general cost of living is very, very low, and so that's actually an incredible hack. So if you're out there and you're thinking, oh, I'd like to go live in Japan for a little while, and you have the remote work ability, post-pandemic, obviously, once borders open again, it could be really fun to do a remote work. So say like a month in each of these cities or a few of these cities. Some of these cities don't work as well as others, but you could find maybe a long-term Airbnb, or some of these hotels. It's not quite as exciting, but like some of these hotels like Dormy Inn and Tokyu Stay and Daiwa Royanet, they do long-term discounts. So you could do a month, and there's washing machines and, you could, hot plates and stuff like that. So you could kind of hack together an interesting remote work situation that would cost a fraction of what daily life in, say, New York or San Francisco would cost. So that's really interesting. And then in terms of like social media affecting these places, it's not really having an effect. In the sense of, the only thing it could possibly be doing would be pulling in some kind of tourism component. And even the guy in Yamaguchi, who was like, had all the no photo signs up and was like, oh, don't put it on Instagram. And then they're on Instagram anyway. Even that guy, I think he was more just neurotic than there actually being something negative happening to his business because of Instagram. a town like Yamaguchi is not going to get natural tourism flow. So the place where social media has disruptive effects, and I think it really does have truly disruptive effects, more in cities like Kyoto. Kyoto, I think, has been, certain parts of it eviscerated by social media, basically just folks coming to Japan, for just like 2 days or 3 days. There's a lot of Asian tourists that come to Japan, that were coming to Japan just for the weekend, essentially not sleeping or sleeping just on buses. They'd go to Tokyo for a day, they go to Kyoto for the day, they're sleeping on the bus between the two. And you realize, I've talked to a few of these groups, I'll see folks sitting next to me in a cafe. I'll say, hey, where are you from? What are you here to see? And I'll make some recommendations. And like, for example, I remember this one moment where these two Chinese women were sitting next to me, and I was in a cafe, I was in a curry restaurant down here where I live in Kamakura, and I was like, oh, hey, actually there's this amazing garden over here, and they're like, yeah, we got temples in China, we're not here to see temples. They were literally here, they had taken an overnight bus to go to a train stop down the road because it's featured in a famous manga, and to go to that train stop to take a selfie in front of it in order to post on whatever Chinese social network everyone posts on, in order to basically fulfill, in a sense, the value proposition of having come to Japan, and to be able to extract the value which is seen as sort of social posturing or whatever. So it's like, okay, I'm going to go, and normally pre-COVID, this train intersection down the road here from me will have thousands of people a day going to that train intersection. So that, you start to feel like that has a massively negative effect on just local life around here. So getting, for example, being able to take the train, because you have thousands of tourists a day taking the train to go to this one stop. That's just a rural stop with literally nothing there but a train stop, some tracks, the ocean, that just happened to be drawn for a manga. That is where lots of negative comes in. In places like Yamaguchi or even, Matsumoto or whatever, the natural flow of tourism is so minimal, non-existent, that the only thing social media is really going to, I think, bolster would be local travelers that would maybe make, the effort to go and find this cafe to have this cheesecake or whatever. But even that guy's story, it kind of rung a little exaggerated, in the sense of, I don't think he had like lines of people waiting to come in for that long. Maybe there was like a few days that some folks came and they wanted cheesecake. So I think it can be exaggerated. The thing that really just struck me was the ambient sense of validation and fame associated with the check mark. I mean, it was just universally, I'd be chatting at, like, I remember that okonomiyaki restaurant that I was at in Tsuruga, and chatting, and then at the end it's like, oh, hey, let's connect on Instagram. And actually that's been really good, that connecting with all these small businesses on Instagram, because now I kind of have this feed reminding me of these places, and it is one of these sort of, I guess, like theoretical benefits of social media playing out experientially, where it's like, oh yeah, that is nice to kind of stay connected with some of these places, and just see what's going on, and they can follow the rest of my trip, something like that. It's a very easy system to kind of connect through, very light touch. But even at the okonomiyaki restaurant, which is like, it was just this family, really kind of in the middle of nowhere, and as soon as they saw the blue check mark, it was like instantly things changed. Or there's this other cafe in Yamaguchi where I came back the next day, and the owner, the Harley riding owner, was like, "You're a blue check mark." And I was like, she's like, who are you really? So I think maybe the thing it does is that in places like Yamaguchi, where you are kind of outside of the city, there's maybe a sense of greater celebrity or whatever connected with social media, some kind of social media fame. And I think the blue check mark, maybe that has a higher signal because so many people fake follower accounts. So his follower account alone is not enough to guarantee true celebrity, but the check mark means actual vetted celebrity by some third party authority. So, next question. You seem to have a natural gift for getting strangers to open up to you. Is that something you have to work at significantly, or does the unique nature of locations and circumstances of your interactions simply present the opportunities? Thank you for saying that. And I think it's a few things. I think fundamentally, everyone who's watching this, if you went and you went out and talked to 5 strangers today, and you weren't like completely neurotic about it, you were just kind of, hey, if you said, hey, I'm doing a little research on our area, and could we talk for a second? I bet 4 out of 5 of those people would be very happy to chat with you and share a lot with you. I think just the nature of humans, for the most part, outside of, say, like Manhattan, where everyone's in a rush, is they want to talk with you. And even in Manhattan, I'm sure you would have a high hit rate. Go to Washington Square Park and just chat with some people around. I'm sure people would want to talk with you. So I think that what I'm doing on these walks and the connections I'm making are pretty just intrinsic to the human condition. I don't think there's that much of my own that is unique that I'm bringing to the table to kind of unlock these connections necessarily, or these these sort of this openness of these people. That said, I do think there is something unique about me being not Japanese, about me speaking Japanese. And for some of these people, that's sometimes the first time they've ever spoken with someone who isn't Japanese, kind of intimately or fluently. And so, yeah, that can open up different venues of conversation for sure. But I didn't get the sense of necessarily being treated like special because of that. And if anything, that can be a negative. Your foreignness can be the thing that kind of people don't want you to come into the shop. At a couple places, turn me away. Just the energy was just, okay, this is not the right place for me to be in. And you learn to read that and kind of step away from it. In terms of getting to this point of talking to folks, like I'm talking on these trips, a big part of it was watching actually my good friend and mentor John that I mention a lot in these newsletters. And actually John really got me walking. He kind of opened up this whole world to me. He has a 40 plus year connection to Japan. He's walked way more than I have of the country. But it was traveling with John and we started by doing Kumano Kodo routes, and watching John actually interact with people, that seeded the notion that this was possible to kind of connect with folks in this way, because I'd watch John just be kind and open and thoughtful and have bringing historical context to the conversation. So being in the middle of nowhere, for example, on the Kumano Kodo, but knowing the history of that middle of nowhere spit of land. And when you talk to a farmer saying, hey, this is where that thing happened, right? And they're kind of delighted by that. And realizing that understanding a locale before you go there, I mean, this is very obvious, but understanding a locale before you go there, and then weaving that understanding or that signaling of understanding into conversation changes that relationship in the sense of that you are showing respect for that place and for those people. That's implicit in the conversation now. And what I think that does is it unlocks a lot of trust, is that, you've shown, however superficially, that you have an interest in the place, that you're not just passing through, that you're not just kind of fetishizing something or, getting a superficial sense of a place, but you have even the smallest amount of historical context, I think really does suddenly amp up the trust. So I saw John do that. I think he does it completely without conscious intention. I mean, he just knows all these facts about the country. He also has 40 years of tea ceremony under his belt, and so he kind of has this imperial Japanese that he uses, super formal but colloquial super formal. I think it partially was learned through tea ceremony. language and formality, but then applied in like a rural context. It'd be kind of like, so there really isn't like a sense of class in Japan. So it's not like, oh, this person has a upper class accent or a lower class accent. So you don't really, I think in England, this obviously wouldn't, like a posh accent would not like unlock farmers in England trust. They would kind of maybe bristle at that. But in Japan, using a kind of higher register of formality in a rural setting as a non-Japanese, I think that combination is delightful for folks. Like, I think they're just kind of surprised by it. And in a lot of cases, it's probably the most polite anyone's ever been to them. So that element, I think, of conversation and respect and having a historical context and having that kind of register of formality, all of that together, I think can really unlock quick connections to people and quick kind of ramping up of trust. So I think that's all kind of woven in there. Next question. Let's see here. Any gear surprises? So surprises with gear. I'd say no. The Instinct, which is right over here, Instinct watch, pretty good, not bad. Still going strong. This is I upgraded to the solar powered version, and it got really good battery life. I found it never ran out on a single day's walk, no matter how long. I was always doing GPS tracking on this and on the phone. I like to do it on both at the same time. This was, I sleep with this on. This is my alarm clock on the road. I find it to be really great. I do despise the charger. I think the charger is horrible. It has its own port on the back there. You can see that thing on the bottom. Absolutely miserable. I despise it. It is slow. It takes over an hour, maybe even 2 or 3 hours to go from pretty low to fully charged, which to me feels like with a battery this small should not take that long. So that is the one gear kind of complaint about this guy, but otherwise I really love this watch. And then the other biggest insight change was that I switched from my Danner boots, which were Danner is like constantly changing their lineup now every year. So if you find a pair you like, they may not exist next year. And also the fit I find to be really inconsistent between same size pairs of boots. So I started looking outside of Danner recently. Just found the quality control isn't up to snuff. And I bought a pair of ultra marathon focused, super freaking day glow red, almost pink, New Balance, essentially walking / ultra marathon running shoes. And those were wonderful. Oh my God, these were so amazing. I will never do a big walk like this again using any kind of booty thing. As soon as you start going into the mountains, you need the boots because you need the traction. And if you're carrying a heavy pack, you need the stiffness of sole, especially if you're going over rough terrain. That's where that really comes in. And otherwise, like on a trip like this where my pack was still heavy with all the gear, this camera, this tripod, my Leica, other gear, I was carrying my computer every day pretty much. All of that sort of comes together at about probably 8 to 10 kilograms itself. It's pretty heavy, maybe 7 to 10. But even it's not that heavy. Once you get over 12 kilos, 15 kilos, get into that range, that's when you really start to feel it in your feet, and that extra support can come into play. But I loved for this like 7 to 10 kilogram load where I wasn't doing mountain walking. These New Balances were astounding. They were so comfy. I didn't have to tape at all. No hot spots. They were wonderful. So that was a really, really nice gear surprise. Fantastic. Let me see what we've got for questions in the chat, which I have not been keeping up with. So hello from all over the world. Michigan. So Shantanu asks, when you're writing daily newsletters, I assume that there's There's not much time for editing. When you look back at them after the walk to turn them into books, do you feel the urge need to rewrite? Yeah, no, these are all, for the most part, first drafts that I would then maybe be able to kind of basically, so I'll write a draft, I'll bring it into the newsletter software. I write a draft in Ulysses, bring it into the newsletter software, which is this web thing. And then as I'm doing that, I will do a little bit of editing while I'm bringing it in. And then I will send test emails to myself. As I read those, I then do more edits, but it's all pretty light touch. It's no big structural changes. It's just kind of sentence by sentence, kind of small edits. So that's about where the edits max out on those. That said, I do spend most of the day pre-writing in my brain, or like taking notes, which I don't really reference the notes that much. They're just to help me remember maybe a few details. And then just by making the note, it's kind of there in your head at night when you go to write. So, on these walks, I have a lot of people that write in that want to meet up, that want to walk with me for a day, for example, or, get a coffee or get a beer or things like that. And I have to say pretty much categorically no to everyone as a rule. I really appreciate the interest and the desire to come and join. But what I'm doing essentially is I'm in my writing room as I'm walking, as I'm moving through the city, as I'm walking through the countryside. I am in essentially a moving writing room. And it would be kind of like saying, hey, can I come to your office and can I just sit there in your office with you for the afternoon while you write? You just wouldn't be able to do the work if you had a stranger there with you and maybe you were chatting a little bit. So the silence is really important for me as part of the writing process throughout the day. And that's what's kind of exciting about these trips, is that they become these rigorous sort of, I say ascetic a lot, these kind of rigorous ascetic experiences of creativity. It's just kind of like a moving office, a moving writing space. So when I'm walking around and going in circles some days, because some days I will be like, all right, I just want to get 10 kilometers in because I haven't walked enough yet in this city. Let's get at least 10 in the morning done. When I'm doing that, and I don't have podcasts on, I'm not listening to music, I'm not looking at social media, I'm not reading the news, you are writing. This is why I find my mind naturally goes into this place of working over sentences, thinking about how to write about what I'm seeing, working and reworking on a paragraph level. And sometimes a sentence will be so kind of crystalline or whatever in the mind, I'll dictate that sentence. I'll be to bring that up later. But a big part of the day is writing, even though I'm not in front of the computer. So when I do look back at them, they're not quite as raw or whatever as they could be. But when I look back too to turn this stuff into books, as I'm doing with the Nightingale archive now, it changes so much that I would not want to put out a book that was just kind of like, oh, I'm just publishing all the stuff I just wrote over the last month here. There's something, I see this as a first draft, sort of a vomitorium draft where you're just spewing all over the room, getting everything out as much as possible. A big part of it is just to remember what happened on these trips of kind of making these newsletters, because you forget so quickly the details and everything. And so then when I return to this, and I probably won't look at these pieces again for at least 6 months, when you return to it, then you're kind of like going, okay, well, what were the gems? What can I expand on? What can I pull out? And I will almost on a paragraph by paragraph basis kind of atomize everything and then think about reconstituting it as a different whole. So if that makes sense. So I'm not really concerned about, when I'm writing these newsletters, how refined it is or if it'll be usable later or whatever. It's really just that process of, okay, let's get something out, let's get something done, and make sure we capture the experience of the day in a way that we can return to pull out nuggets and important components. So that's kind of that's kind of one of the how I think about that. So I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. Matsumoto is definitely great. Is great. I definitely considered living there when I went. Yeah, it's really good. The trains in and out of Tokyo are a little weird. It is kind of like in the middle of nowhere, but it's pretty good. TC Lin says, my friend, fellow photographer Jinku Nishimura lives near Yamaguchi. I visited his rice farm, but never went into Yamaguchi, but now I feel I should visit. So thanks. Yeah, Yamaguchi is a great city. I was surprised. When I went there 2 years ago, I didn't go for Yamaguchi. I went for the Hagi Olkan walk from Yamaguchi to Hagi over the mountains, across that kind of like that bit of Honshu between the Japan Sea and the Inland Sea. And Yamaguchi, I remember just being shocked, like, oh my God, wow, there's a lot more going on here than I expected. And that also kind of seeded, I think, this idea of going to these cities that you normally would maybe just go to start another walk or to start another adventure. So I definitely recommend. You could spend a couple days in Yamaguchi. It's quite cool. Alex Wolf says, have I ever tried hoka? I don't know what that is. I don't think it's legal in Japan. Anne says, we want to see those pink New Balance shoes. I'll try to send a photo, one of the final little newsletters. But they were great because my outfit is so it's just black essentially. It's our dark grays or whatever, heather, colored, and so to have this like pop of pink on your feet was actually quite delightful. Hoka shoes. Yeah, I figured they were shoes. I have not tried Hoka shoes. Could you divulge anything more about the coffee shop in Yamaguchi? Yeah, I mean, the coffee shop in Yamaguchi, I mean, it's I can just tell you where it is. It's Haraguchi is the name of the coffee shop. You can go and check it out. It kind of has this interesting history. The owner is a woman. It's a husband-wife team, but the wife started it, and she's actually not in the shop a lot these days because she's doing kind of like pop-up coffees elsewhere. But yeah, the whole, story, basically the husband just ran his mouth way more than he should have and kind of told me her whole story. And then I think he realized he should have let her tell the story, and maybe he got some of the details wrong. But it just involved like where she trained essentially. Again, no one would be surprised. If you walk in the shop, you know anything about Japanese coffee, you will know where she trained. And so, anyway, whatever, it's classic, extremely dark roasted Kissa coffee, cloth drip. You know what I'm talking about. You know this stuff. I actually do not like it at all. I find it completely undrinkable. There is this style of quote unquote classic Kissa coffee that in general, Kissa coffee just isn't that great. This is why Kissa by Kissa was not about the amazing or the interesting coffee of Kissa. It was about pizza toast, which is pretty good. But I find there's this fetishization of super dark roast, super slow drip pour, cloth drip coffee that I find undrinkable. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that out loud or not. It is totally undrinkable and unexciting to me as someone who loves coffee because there's nothing left. There's no taste left. So my theory is that this affectation of roasting to death, to absolute blackness of bean, and then using like 24 grams in a small net drip that you then drip over for, 5-10 minutes sometimes. And then you have to like reheat that sludge. And then serving that up in like 150 cc, I guess CL, ML container, little like demi-tasse style coffee. It's just not good. I think that started because the beans were just crappy. And I think that was the only way to kind of get something, kind of some ritual around crappy beans. I just think the beans were bad, 100 years ago or 50 years ago even. Think about the path of beans. It's like, that flow, I don't think the farmers knew how to like really take care of the beans properly. I'm sure they weren't packaged properly across the ocean. I mean, to get beans from Brazil or Colombia or whatever, you know, and a lot of these old classic Kissas, it's all South American focused beans. I think it was just a long, onerous, horrible process, and like the product wasn't always consistent. And so the only way to get consistency was to kind of murder it. And then, and then, sorry, I'm seeing your comments as I'm kind of going, don't look at the comments, just finish your thought. And then I think the consistency was through murder, and then like this weird ritual, which then allows a cult to kind of form around it. And I mean, it is kind of fun. It's kind of interesting. To me, it does not produce drinkable coffee. It does not produce coffee that respects the origins of the beans. It kind of makes it all the same. It feels to me also like you're brewing coffee for smoking, for tobacco consumption, and to being in a place that's full of tobacco, which is what these places were like 50 years ago. So you were walking into an ashtray, you yourself were smoking 5 cigarettes while you were at the Kissa, and you had these beans of moderately dubious origin, and you wanted to feel like there was some kind of like cocktail-esque, you know, ceremony or romance to the preparation. So, you know, you can kind of see how all these things were created to then produce here's like a super strong whiskey version of coffee to have with your cigarettes. And then a lot of times too, people would not drink it black. So it's like coffee made to be filled with cream and sugar and blah, blah, blah. So that, to me, I haven't really written about this because it's like, I'd rather just, again, focus on the positives. But to me, that this kind of classic Kissa way of doing coffee is not in any way, it's not something I'm excited by. You know, it's like watching James Hoffman videos talking about flavor. I would love to get James Hoffman to go and do a tour. James Hoffman, if you're out there watching, I am sure you're not. If you're watching, come to Japan when borders open up. We will do a classic Kissa tour together. And I just want to see what your reaction is to this kind of insanity of roasting and brewing. So that's that. So long story short, like Haraguchi, this cafe in Yamaguchi, is where I went. They do that super classic slow style. You get a cup of brain doom, essentially. I mean, it's got to have the highest concentration of caffeine per milliliter of any liquid out there. And some people really love that, I guess, with their cheesecake or whatever. But I do think there is a cult element that has sprung up around certain personalities in the Kissa world. Unsurprisingly, this happens in the food world constantly. This cult of Kissa, a certain kind of Kissa person, and their training has spread out. And, you know, in some ways it's like the Savoy pizza, Kakinuma-san training, you know, Inoue-san and Tamaki-san and all these other folks who've taken the Kakinuma way of making pizza and spread it. There's kind of a similar classic Kissa in Tokyo that has also sort of birthed a lot of people selling what I think is extremely burnt, tasteless coffee. But someone seems to like it, so they keep making it. Let's see here. Matt says, Tsuruga, you were really, really excited and surprised in the moment, and I circled to visit. Still suggest a visit to Tsuruga. Not really. I mean, you could. The caveats are always like, how much time do you have, right? Do you have months to travel? Are you coming for 10 days? I think if you have, say, like a month, you could put it in there for a couple days, because I think that would be a fun contrast, perhaps to other cities. There's that hiking loop I did, which is in the GPS file. I'm sorry, the GPS file, by the way, is not, I should have labeled. I'll relabel every day more properly with city names. I kind of just wanted to dump that out really quickly. I'll put up another version of that. That's a little easier to parse. But you could take that file and put it into Gaia, for example, on the iPhone app. On the iPhone, it's an app, Gaia GPS, and that will import the GPS file, and then you can follow my routes pretty easily. But there was a really nice sort of wetlands mountain walk that I did that kind of takes you past views of this like cement factory and this huge, amazing, incredible cement factory in the ocean, and these beautiful views of the bay. And so you could do that, plus visit a couple shops. in town. The tendon place I went to was one of my top meals of the trip for sure. That was in Tsuruga. That place was wonderful. The owner was wonderful, just really cool, but you might have to wait in line to get in. So I would say it depends. If you have the time, add it, because it is strange. And I'd say if you're going to Tsuruga, I mean, you could kind of do a Kanazawa and then take the train down the coast to Tsuruga, and then you could even go on to Obama for an extra day, just again to kind of experience a couple of these cities that you would normally be off your radar. And then Obama City has a few really amazing kind of renovated little inns downtown, and the morning market is quite famous and amazing and would be worth checking out. Swati says, I enjoyed how humorous the newsletter was this time, a little unfiltered. Was that deliberate, a mood? I loved it. Thank you. Well, I always try to, I hope there's some humor in this stuff. I'm glad it came through. Maybe it was a little more deliberate this time, but I'm always trying to be a little bit funny. Shantanu says, for bitter coffee, when you're having it black, a little bit of lemon helps a lot. It's a good tip. I'll try that. Blue Crubby says, what Kissa masters have a common training ground? I have no idea. Can you expand? So just like I was saying, whatever. I'll just tell you where it was. Because it's not that big a deal. Basically, these folks in Yamaguchi trained at Daibo. The wife trained at Daibo in Tokyo, which search for Daibo Coffee Tokyo, and someone did in English when it shut down. Daibo closed like 5 years ago. Someone did in English a kind of like profile of it that's pretty good. It'll give you a good sense of like what it was like. It's just this guy Daibo. He just did all the coffee. They were basically tearing down. It was right at the intersection of Omotesando crossing, this super posh intersection. It was like in this old building. He was on the second floor. I had been going there for like 15 years, mainly just because the atmosphere was interesting. Again, coffee, not that interesting. Atmosphere is super interesting. Murakami Haruki used to frequent. It kind of has this. It just developed this. Again, this cult, this mythology, more than for me. Oh, this is where you go to experience amazing coffee. It was where you go with a novel and a pack of cigarettes, and you just smoke. You'd read. Everyone was reverent, quiet. It was like going to a library. Wood everything's paneled in wood, and then your coffee master with his gray hair is silently either roasting the beans. He roasted super small batches, and then, would do the drip, drip, drip. And then you get your super strong, crazy coffee that had no taste at all. And you think, oh my God, I'm being so avant-garde, smoking my gitans, reading some French literature, smoking this, drinking this super strong coffee. So that's the place, Daibo. And Daibo actually trains a lot of folks now. He has like seminars and stuff. So I've seen even folks in their like 30s opening Kissas now that are kind of like Daibo. They did the Daibo course. And I guess that is just one way of doing coffee that personally, okay, here's my take. Whatever. Whether or not you want to hear this. Here's my take. I think there's an opportunity to take that Daibo level of procession and formality and cloth dripping and all of that, and take contemporary roasts, take the contemporary supply chain of incredible beans roasted to experience their flavors, to have just a total delight of coffee experience. Apply that ceremony to it. Use the cloth drip. Do the drip, 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 drip. But do it, dial in the grind, dial in the doses in a way that respects the coffee maximally. And I think you can end up with incredible cups of coffee that will be nuanced, that'll be sweet, that'll have great flavor profiles, that you can drink black, that you can offer up all sorts of different single origin beans. You can do blends, whatever. And if you open a Kissa of that style, like a Daibo of that style, but using these contemporary beans, recognizing that you don't have to burn the beans, I think you could actually create like an entirely new class of Kissa that would do really well. Like if you wanted to open a Kissa and have it be successful as a business practice, I think that would be a great strategy. There's the classic Kissa in Shibuya. The name, why am I forgetting the name now? I'm sure you guys know this, but this Shibuya classic, it's like something cha. What are you? Where are you? Give me 1 second. Yeah, Chate Hato. This is the one that, like, you know, Blue Bottle founder James was like, this is what inspired me to start Blue Bottle. Actually, their coffee is pretty good. They do not murder the beans. So if they're kind of moving in that direction that I'm talking about, but you could take it even a step further. You could do a Blue Bottle-esque, you know, kind of a Verve-esque roasting style with classic Kissa dripping. I think that would be amazing. So yeah, so there are Kissa masters that people are training with and learning from. Jake says, yeah, it seems like the same reason a lot of these classic foods use ketchup instead of actual tomatoes. You know, it's all they had after the war. I think, yeah, there's some truth there. That's like a lot of these habits and rituals were developed in a time of incredible scarcity. So you did not have, for example, high quality ingredients. And so how do you make consistent results using non-high quality ingredients? Well, you try to either burn them or use kind of these artificial ingredients to get everything to the same level consistently. A bit of salt can also drop bitterness in some folks. Old Navy guys run into something. Yeah. Smoker's Cup, indeed. Yeah, so Ezra says, I'm really attracted to Kissa culture, but as a third wave coffee snob, the coffee itself is not at all a draw. Thanks for coming clean. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why I've never written about the coffee, because I always say when I write about coffee, I get American style coffee at these Kissa, because I find if you take the general standard cup of coffee at a Kissa, it's just overdosed and over extracted. I find to be really unpleasant to drink. If you dilute, say, 20% with hot water, you get to something that's a little more sweet, a little more palatable. And so that's what the American coffee is. It's a slightly diluted normal coffee. That to me is really the only choice in a lot of these Kissa. And it's actually funny, another insane coffee story. One of my favorite Kissas I went to on this trip was Abe in Matsumoto, which was just wonderful. It's run by family. It's 3 generations. The son and daughter are involved. The son's wife is involved. It's super weird to see this. I've never seen a Kissa with this much generational buy-in. Most Kissas, the folks who started it, do not want their kids to be involved. They want to close it down. This is just a single generation thing. You know, it's like, you know, imagine you opened a diner in the 50s. You didn't do that because you had this like passion for diners or whatever, probably because that was the only option you had. And so you want your kids to do something different. So you can understand the impulse of a lot of these owners to not have their kids carry on their tradition. But Abe and Matsumoto, just everyone's in, man. And so the son has started producing these YouTube videos. The son's probably in his 30s, of his dad, you know, showing his dad how to make coffee. And they have this YouTube video called Perfect Coffee. And it has like the most views, I don't know, 10,000 views or something. And if you watch it, and the dad showed me, and he's like, this is how you know it's perfect coffee. And basically he just takes these like over roasted, murdered beans in a cloth drip. Like, it looks like it's like 30 grams for a cup of ground coffee, and then gets this sheen on the grinds that just does not look healthy at all. And he's like, this is the sheen, that means perfect coffee. I'm just like, all right, whatever. So there is this, if you're into drinking coffee that has flavor profiles, distinct flavor profiles, none of this stuff is going to delight you. So you just have to be delighted by the people, by the ridiculousness of the fact that that's perfect coffee, for example. It's kind of fun. You know, you just have to lean into it and go, all right, this is just what you're into. But like I said, opportunity, starting an awesome classic style Kissa and serving up super delicious cups of coffee. Also, the problem, another issue is that you have people who've been coming to these cafes for like 40 years, 30 years, and that's the coffee they have only had. They don't want delicious coffee. They want kick you in the teeth coffee. And so that's what they get. It's the same reason why a lot of these kissas, even though legally they're not supposed to allow smoking anymore. Still a lot of smoking, you see. So Shantanu says, would you consider doing a year or 3 month stay at one of these places as a pop-up newsletter project? I don't think so. I think that's too long. That's not a pop-up newsletter. That's a lifetime newsletter at that point. So yeah, I think, like I said in the beginning, I said there was a couple of cities that I could do a year at, but I don't think I'd want to document it in the same way that I have on this trip. Have I had coffee at Inukaya in Mitaka before? No, mainly just because I haven't spent a lot of time in Mitaka. I think Kichijoji is about as far out as I have ventured. Mitaka I would go to there's a really great ultralight backpacking store in Mitaka that I've been to, but I think in Ghibli is sort of out there. But let's see here, Irukaya in Mitaka. Let's see. It's not showing up on Google Maps. Irukaya. I wonder. Ah, there it is. I have not been. Do you recommend? If anyone has recommendations, send them over. Always like to. It's good to get Kissa recommendations. But on this trip, that was kind of what was, what was exciting, was just following my nose kind of along the whole way, and seeing where that brought us. And the Jazz Kissa subplot was definitely a big part of that. Let's see. I have a few more questions from the emails, but if anyone out there has questions that you want to shoot into the chat, please do so. Maybe I'll keep this going for another 15, 20 minutes, maybe. So one interestingly pointed question that came up was, how do you seem so shrewd about the US without currently living here? I grew up there, and I spent a lot of time pre-COVID. Actually, a big part of the year is spent in the US. I would do, every year I'd spend 2 to 6 months some years in the US. I mean, I was in Iowa doing the Iowa Writers Workshop a few years ago. I would do retreats, all over the US, spending time in New Hampshire and Virginia, in sort of suburban Chicago, up in Portland. Before COVID, I was giving talks all over the place, all over America. Obviously a lot of time in New York City. I lived in the Bay Area in San Francisco for essentially 3 years, 2010 to 2013. So I had a lot of experience with the US, and I think living in Japan, the reason why I'm so shrewd, I just think I'm being honest of my criticism of sort of the social contracts that are and aren't being abided by or upkept by the government fundamentally, and some of these cities I'm walking through here in rural Japan are really down and out, especially on these bigger walks that are linear and continuous and contiguous. And I'm not taking trains, skipping the in-between bits. I'm walking through everything. And you will walk through certain parts, like around, near Toyohashi, in Gifu, and sort of rural bits that were more industrial and maybe are less industrial now, really down and out places that are all just like keiba gambling. And, you just see drunk people kind of on the street and early in the morning. You walk through areas like that, and there is no sense of danger. There's no sense of violence. There's no sense of really anything to be afraid of. And there's also no sense of these people falling as far as You see people fall in the streets of San Francisco. You walk for 2 blocks in San Francisco and you see people fall further. In 10 minutes, I see people in San Francisco having fallen further than anyone I've ever seen in Japan fall. And you just realize there are systems in place here that don't allow people to fall that far. And the benefit is, you know, on a walk like this, it's so, you know, because it's one of these things, it's like you don't notice the absence of something unless you have something to compare it to. So the reason why I keep bringing up on these walks kind of that falling from grace of so much of American society, especially with the opioid elements and with the heroin trade and all this stuff, is that it helps me recognize and be grateful for what it is that we have here in terms of social sort of support and safety. And you know, I pay a lot of money in taxes and I pay a lot of money in healthcare, and I'm not, you know, I'm not using up my allotment of healthcare money, but to know that the places I'm walking through, no matter how rural and kind of and sort of desolate in some ways, that the people are to a certain degree are being upheld to a certain level of grace, that inspires me. That makes me really excited. I'm happy and joyful, and you feel the benefit. It allows me to focus on connecting with people and to writing about those connections and talking about the joy you find in these places, and talking about the sense of, well, certain parts are depopulating, but other parts are kind of have this growing creative community like Onomichi. And so I think my ire and my frustration towards America is a frustration of seeing what is possible when people are supported and when there is this kind of collective opting in to, like I said, you know, it's kind of like reciprocal support and symbiotic kind of support. And the benefit is they're multitudinous. It's just like you just feel people are happier, people are more productive, like the creative people are able to be more creative. You know, it's like things aren't perfect here. I'm sure if you go to Scandinavia, you feel a lot of the same things, but like that to me is really inspiring. So my kind of, how is it framed? My shrewdness towards America is a shrewdness of hope for what could be when you have the amount of money you have in a place like America, and when you put certain systems in place, support systems, things flourish, things thrive. People can take risks in a way that you can't take risks in America. You know, it's like, I was talking with a friend the other day, and he was talking about how, like, in his 20s, he wasn't able to go to the dentist enough because he didn't have good dental coverage, because he, you know, the way things were structured in the States, he was freelancing, yada, yada, yada. It's like, that stinks, you know, and folks in Japan, you know, you can just go to the dentist. It's just there. It's not that expensive. You can get the work done that you need to get done. So that is why I'm shrewd about the US to a degree, because when things work well, it's amazing. It's fantastic. And I love feeling that, and I love feeling the gratitude for that. And it's just kind of a instantiation of that. Let's see here. Brian says, I haven't been to Irukaya, but I've always wanted to. Only seats 4 people. You need reservations. Oh my God. And there are a lot of rules. They also serve whiskey. Yeah, there is, you know, there's something I noticed on this walk more than in Tokyo. I've not noticed this as much in Tokyo, because I think business wise in Tokyo, you can just be a Kissa in Tokyo and have a good business. In Sakata, in Yamaguchi, if you're just a Kissa, that might not be enough. So a lot of these Kissas will be bars at night, as I wrote about in a couple of the newsletters. So that doesn't surprise me that they also serve whiskey in the Mitaka place. Genkanai asks, is the next walk planned? Not at all. Well, sort of. I'm supposed to go to England in May. I'm supposed to walk the Cotswolds with a group of 10 people and do a walk and talk, which has been delayed 2.5 years now, unbelievably. So that is the plan right now. We'll see how Omicron plays out. Hopefully, Omicron will just burn itself out and we'll just be done by May. Maybe it'll get postponed again. But right now, no. Well, actually, there is in in Japan, actually, they're planning in April with a couple friends. There's this coastal long walk that's kind of been built up in Tohoku that I'm going to go investigate, I think 10 days of, but nothing formal like what I've done right now. No super mega walks. I actually, for the next really big walk, would love to do the Camino. I loved the 2 weeks I did. I did a week at the beginning of the French Camino. I did the Portuguese Camino from Vigo, basically from the border into Santiago. I loved the French way, and I want to do the whole thing properly. So I would love to do that once it feels safe to do that. But really what I've got to focus on is just synthesis. I've got the Nightingale book I want to get done in the next 2 months, and I want to do something with the Tokaido walk I did last year. And then this too, I feel like there's something fertile with this work. So that's 3 more books that I'd like to just kind of focus on and get done over the next 18 months, I guess would feel like a reasonable timeline. So Neil says, I'd love to see something similar, but visiting secondhand bookshops in these places. Yeah, that would be bookstores would be a good angle to lean in on as well, for sure. And there are a lot of those, definitely. Yeah, there's that one Kissa in Matsumoto I went to in front of my hotel that was also a bookshop, and that was very cool. So Wiboda asks, how do you scout out these routes before you embark on your walks? How do you avoid ending up on the side of a freeway for 2 hours? You mean, I imagine you mean for like the bigger walks, the Tokaido, Nakasendo. I mean, the walk I just did, the thing I just did, it was all inside cities. So there really weren't routes, specific routes to walk. But on the bigger ones, you walk on the highway sometimes. It sucks. It's like, yeah, sometimes you have like 2 hours or a day of, walking no shoulder on like a really crappy highway. I remember one of the worst days of walking was Karuizawa to Suwako on the Nakasendo. It was like 8 days into that first big walk. And it was like pouring rain. I was climbing up a mountain, pouring rain, no shoulder, tractor trailers flying by. That was really, really not fun. So sometimes you do that. And if you're not super strict like I am, you can say, all right, I'm going to take the bus on this route, or I'm going to take the train. But I think the rigor of that strictness of being like, I'm only going to walk, I'm not going to take any other transportation. What it does is it forces you to contend with these kind of, no man zones in between places that might be horrible and desolate. And I think seeing that is important because you kind of understand the fuller picture of what a country is, or what a route has become. John asks if I've considered doing an e-bike ride across parts of Japan. So I started doing an e-bike column for Paper Sky, and my first one came out a couple months ago. If you search Craig Mod, Paper Sky, those e-bike ride columns should come up, and the second one should be out anytime. I filed it a month ago. I don't know where it is, but those come out in English and Japanese, and they're kind of fun. I love e-bikes. I don't love any of the e-bikes I own, though. That's kind of what's frustrating. I feel like we're still at this place where truly well-made e-bikes, simple e-bikes. Like I rented an e-bike when I biked from Onomichi. So that was a question that came up. How did I get from Onomichi to Imabari by bike? Did I bring a bike with me? Did I ship a bike? You can just rent bikes there. I rented an e-bike, a fancy specialized e-bike from Waka. It's actually quite expensive with pickup and everything. For 2 days, it was like $300. But it was a really high-end, fancy, specialized e-bike. It was pretty good. I mean, it didn't like light me on fire. I wasn't super excited by it, but it was quite well made. It was very light. I think it was under 10 kilos, which for an e-bike is super light. Carbon, easy to ride. It was pretty good, but I'm not captivated by it, if that makes sense. So I'm still looking for an e-bike that really blows my mind. And a part of the problem is the hardware can be good, but the software is horrible, or the software and hardware are good, but the frame is horrible. We're in this kind of weird e-bike zone right now, but I feel like over the next 5 years, we're going to see some truly, truly amazing e-bike stuff come up. So I have started doing some e-biking and writing related to it. And it's all connected with this area that I live in. And the rides are all about 70 kilometers or so, something like that. So it's good. Yeah, inner city walks, but the highway shoulder seems unavoidable. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of back roads you can do. You can avoid highways if you really try and want to, but sometimes it can just take you way out of the way. And if you don't have the time, then it's not worth it. But if you have time and you believe that those inner city nowhere zones, those interstitial spaces are something that's interesting to you, then yeah, definitely go for it. You know, I think a lot of Shikoku, the Ohenno, is a lot of so-called highway walking. Although now that I've done these other walks, I can't imagine. I can envision what people have written about in Shikoku as being highway walking, as just being kind of like crappy road walking, which is actually not that bad. So Shikoku is on the radar for sure. To kind of follow up with Gen there, Shikoku's on the radar for a thing I want to do and I want to do properly, and maybe that will be maybe in a year or two's time the thing that I kind of focus on. But that'll be a 6-week really big walk. Maybe that'll be the next big pop-up. But I got to get these other books done. Takes a lot of time to do the books. Got to get the books done. Across Korea walk. I've always considered when I lived there since coming from the US, I was amused at the idea of being able to walk across the whole country. Yeah. Korea is very, very compact. You could definitely do that. You can kind of do coast to coast in Japan without walking the length. So there are ways to do that. That's kind of fun. You could walk like the thickest part of Honshu, and even that wouldn't take that long. So there are kind of fun walks you can hack together if you want to. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then I think I'm going to wrap up. I've been drinking a lot of water, and I think a bathroom break might be necessary. Overall, I'll do a little overall monologue. This was, for me, a wonderful experience. I loved it. I had a great time. It was exhausting, of course. You know, it's like people ask questions. A couple of questions were about introversion and how do I kind of overcome that. And I think part of it is like by running this newsletter, by running a pop-up mailing list newsletter like this, that is a forcing function for me to overcome those inherent desires to not kind of reach out, to not talk to people. I wouldn't say that. One person asked a question of do I feel like I have to produce content? Absolutely not. I feel no beholdenness whatsoever. I'm sorry to you wonderful people. I feel zero beholdenness at all. I'm zero, absolutely zero. The only thing I feel beholden to is the creative process and the creative process of producing, which I believe is critical to doing great work. So I feel beholden to the fact that I have to write something every day, not because I need to placate anyone, but because I want to respect that creative rigor and that process. And because I know that by doing that and pushing through that, it'll make me better at what I'm doing, as it'll make my craft better. And so that is like the higher power that when I'm moving through a city and I'm thinking, oh man, okay, I've got to talk to somebody, or I want to, you know, maybe I should go into this shop. When I'm doing that, it's because I'm turned on by those connections. There's a chemical high you get for sure from connecting with someone and having a great conversation with a stranger. But also I know that it will enable me to grow the craft in a way that I find is super additive, positive, and critical. And then the bonus is that sometimes folks out there are entertained by it. Like, that's great. That's a good bonus. And also because I see the end result, the end piece of these things, not as say a pop-up newsletter, but as the book. The book is the critical thing to produce. That's where the final rigor happens. That's where the final kind of sort of whittling away and finding the core essence of the thing that we've been sort of muddling through for the last month. What that core essence is, that to me reveals itself in the book process. So that's really the thing that's important. I wrote about this last year in my membership write-up. You can see on my website the 2020 look back at what we produced and stuff. Books are the thing that I'm focused on. These are all kind of hacks to get me to hone my craft to do better books and to get the grist for better books. And so the overcoming the introversion is just part and parcel of believing that the book production and book process is for me a really important part of being alive. And as I talked about in the members only video, it's kind of respect for this sense of consciousness and moving through the world and the ability to do that and all yada yada yada. And so getting to those books is really important, and overcoming that inherent introversion or laziness or whatever that I find present in my normal day. After a walk like this, I'll walk down the road and I'll see an interesting shop, and I'll think, if I was in walk mode, I would go in there and I would talk to this person in a way that I don't in my normal day to day, just because, again, you do have like kind of a limited amount of energy, and by saying this is sandbox, there's bookends to this. I find I can draw on like a better version of myself, a more energy, sort of potent version of myself. But I am very tired throughout most of the walk, and need these kind of down days, and some nights I slept like 10 hours, and so, but I don't, as long as I feel like I'm engaging authentically, which just means in a non-bullshitty way. Like, I'm not like, oh, this is going to be good content, let me talk with this crazy person, look at this person looks like they're a mess, let's connect with them and I can write about that and they'll photograph really well. Like, as long as I'm not doing that, but I am respecting the rigor of craft and that process, then if I sleep for 10 hours, that's fine. That's part of the recovery process. Let's see here. John says, I've always loved your thoughts on movies you've watched recently. Would you be interested to hear your thoughts on Drive My Car? Everyone has said Drive My Car. I've been trying. I was going to stream it or watch it on this walk. I couldn't find it. No one has it. No one's streaming it. And it's not in the movie theaters anywhere in Japan. I really, really want to watch Drive My Car. Although now I'm worried because literally 10 people or more have written into me and said, I'm just writing in to tell you to watch Drive My Car. I am a little nervous about that now. It's like the hype is real, but it can't be worse than Matrix 4. So that should be okay. But yeah, just to wrap up, I had a great time. Everyone out there who is following along, who sent in the wonderful emails and the notes, that all helps me. That I all those little sentences that you write that are like really laudative and positive, I put those in a big note file, and that note file now is just gargantuan. And thank you for that. It does help. You can be exhausted. You can be really tired, and I'm not writing for the entertainment of these newsletters, but I am lifted by the sentiment that what is coming through is well received, and that to me says, okay, great. There is, again, like the grist for something more beyond this that is happening here. It would be hard to do all of this just on my own, writing these things just for myself. Not publishing anywhere, going on these trips, kind of doing it all in solitude. Maybe that's an interesting experiment to try sometime, though, is to do maybe a 10-day walk where, I don't publish anything. So I come to the end of this. I feel great. I feel excited to go back into my other book to edit that. I feel like I have cranked up a certain level of craft, of writing, maybe of the humor component of things. And I want to bring that into my work going forward. In some ways, I did this hitchhiking trip when I was 20, when I first moved to Japan. I hitchhiked Tokyo to Fukuoka and then flew to Okinawa. And I couldn't really speak the language on that trip. And I remember getting to Okinawa and just being so exhausted with the language, with Japanese, just being, oh my God, I've just whittled myself down to nothing. I never want to speak Japanese again. I don't want to say hello to anyone. I burnt myself out. And then a couple weeks later, I started dreaming in Japanese, and you just kind of realize like, oh, okay, we seeded the system and rigorously seeded the system with this like intense period of kind of immersion. And that was actually creating these synaptic connections, these neurological connections within the language components of the mind, right? And then those began to once everything kind of healed, begin to manifest. And then I found, oh, that was actually the jumping point from going from thinking about speaking the language to thoughtlessly being able to speak it, to, within the limited context of what I knew. And so I found the same thing for craft. This is my weird way of hacking, like working in a newsroom. So instead of working in a newsroom 3 years ago, before I started the membership program, I was at this crossroads where I was like, should I move to New York City? Should I leave Japan? Should I join a magazine to get better at my craft, to level up or whatever? And I spoke to a lot of editors, and everyone was like, look, you know what you want to write about. You have some, kind of readership. You can build a system around that and kind of lean into it. And I think finally, like on this newsletter, on Nightingale, I've finally gotten to the place where I believe that. And these projects to me feel like working in the newsroom. You've got the deadline. You've got to get the story. You've got to write something that's publishable. And yes, you come out the other side exhausted, but I also believe that the craft components of the mind have been ratcheted up ever so slightly, And so my hope is that now in a couple weeks' time, there'll be even more fluency to this kind of work in what I'm doing. So it's exciting. I don't know. It's all fun. And, it's been beautiful. It's connecting with these people, understanding this country a little more deeply, a little more intimately. And I'm grateful for, the support from everyone, from my partner for being out there and supporting me and getting on the phone with me and doing calls and my friends and things like that. And for all of your kind messages. So thank you all. Wibota asks, Joe, question, was it golden hour all day long during these series? Yeah, that's what's great about this time of the year. Look at this, my studio right now. It's glowing. This is kind of what it's like all day in December, January in Japan. December walking and photographing, I think, is the best time of the year to do it. And it's almost sunny every day, so it's good for that as well. Anyway, I'll let you all go. Thank you. This was almost 2 hours. I should get some food and get on with the day and go outside for a little bit. But I'll send a couple more emails before wrapping everything up. Oh, thank you all who's joined the membership, who bought copies of Kissa by Kissa. We had a crazy month in the last month in terms of numbers, in terms of new members, in terms of book sales. Totally wonderful. Thank you. It covers the cost of this trip. It covers now the time I'm going to have to spend synthesizing, and it'll cover, it'll help cover some of the kind of production costs going forward, and for the research going into other trips. All of this money, aside from the 6 Maseratis I've got outside, all this money goes into that comes in from the membership and from book sales. It goes into tools. It goes into more trips and being able to do sort of hopefully as inclusive as possible newsletters and things like this that I can do, and hopefully that value is reflected in the work. And I just want to let you all know that I really am super grateful for the opportunity. It's fantastic. It feels exciting. It's a cool, definitely weird way to live, and I love it. And I'd like to keep doing more of this, for the years to come. So thank you all. Have a great day. Have a great Saturday, and we will talk again soon. So thanks a lot.